Hello and good afternoon. Today is January the 7th, 2008. I am Aviva Lee, reporting live in Jerusalem from room 903 for Israel 24/6 TV. Welcome to my Monday afternoon recap of fact without commentary. On January the 3rd of 2008, soldiers in the Israel Defense Force discovered a weapons cache including rocket manufacturing materials, explosive substances, and assorted related equipment. On January the 4th, the Israel Defense Force spokesperson announced that the sovereign state of Israel had in fact undertaken military activity in the city of Nablus. The military operated against a terrorist infrastructure in Nablus, and during that operation 13 hostile combatants were arrested. And in two other incidents, armed gunmen opened fire on Israel soldiers and attempted to inflict harm by hurling improvised hand grenades at those forces. There was no injury or damage reported by Israel in either incident. The spokesperson has announced that the Israel Defense Force is, and I quote, operating in order to protect the lives and ensure the security of Israeli citizens and will continue to operate against terrorist infrastructure in the Judea and Samaria region, end quote. If you recall, on the 29th of December 2007, terrorists murdered 2 of Israel's soldiers while they were hiking in Wadi Telem, and the following information was communicated by the Prime Minister's office last week concerning their deaths. Those 2 soldiers were identified as Corporal Ahikam Amichai and Sergeant David Rubin. The Prime Minister's official spokesperson also reported last week that following the murders, the perpetrators turned themselves in to Arab General Intelligence units in Hebron the same day the murders were committed. Following a demand by the ISA, that Arab Intelligence unit did return the weapons of the 2 murdered Israeli soldiers and the weapons used by the terrorists who committed those murders. The 2 surviving terrorists have been identified as Mr. Ali Hamid Dadanes, age 24, and Mr. Ahmadabad Kalim Taha, age 26. Mr. Dadanes is a resident of Hebron, a clerk at the Hebron Sharia Court, and a Fatah activist. It is known that he was in touch with the Arab General Intelligence Unit prior to the murders. Mr. Taha is also a resident of Hebron, a Fatah activist, and an Arab national security soldier. The 3rd terrorist associated with those murders was killed while Corporal Amichai and Sergeant Rubin defended themselves from their Arab attackers. In detention, the 2 surviving terrorists gave the following summary of events leading up to the murders of the soldiers. One of the terrorists identified the soldiers as Israeli while they were hiking in Wadi Telem. He summoned 2 other terrorists and they planned together to murder the soldiers and steal their weapons. Statements from the Arab agency which detained the 2 murderers contradicted information in the possession of Israel's security apparatus. Based upon that information and that contradiction, Israel's defense forces continued the operation in the area, including, among other actions, the making of wide-ranging arrests. A second official statement from the Israel Defense Forces spokesperson was issued on the 5th of January 2008 with this statistical data, and I quote, Nablus contains some of the most advanced and dangerous terrorist infrastructure, while the highest amount of terrorist attacks from Judea and Samaria originate from the Nablus region, end quote. At his weekly cabinet meeting on the 31st of December 2007, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert eulogized the fallen Israeli soldiers murdered in Wadi Telem and had this to say regarding the government's policy, and I quote, the State of Israel will be unable to carry out any changes on the ground that could expose it to dangers and create problems for the security of the country, both for the Jewish residents in the area in which they live and in any other area. We do not intend to compromise on these issues, and they will certainly be an inseparable part of any dialogue that we may hold." End quote. And that concludes this Monday afternoon recap of military action taken last week by the sovereign state of Israel in its military battle against terrorism. And if all goes well, and if all goes as planned, when President George W. Bush arrives this week, I will be in the press booth covering his statement to the press. Please look for my coverage of the visit of President Bush to the holiest city on earth. I am Aviva Lee, reporting live in Jerusalem from room 903 for Israel 24/6 TV. Thank you, and Shalom.